In this video, I want to explore the frustrating and confusing aspect of co-infections. So a little bit of context. I want to kind of refer to any mental, emotional symptoms of ill health as a disease, as a virus in a certain way, and look at this not as a moral issue in any way, but rather that in our natural human state, we're born curious and innocent and alive. We're also deeply bonded. We're a deeply bonded species. And for most of our millions of years, we're always in families and in groups. And so when that separation is there, when we can't be bonded, there's a certain sickness in that. There's a certain pain and loneliness in not being bonded deeply with a sense of community, with tribe, with family, with partnership. So this is one disease. And then, any sense of chronic pain, grief, hurt, they're all disease. And when it becomes, I guess, ingrained and, systemic, then it's, more diagnosable. But if we look at any symptom as a disease in itself, and then follow the thread back, because what I want to explore here is the complex way and the layers of co-infection. So, for example, in the AIDS virus, it wasn't usually AIDS or HIV that kills people. It's maybe AIDS or HIV lowers the immune system, and then it might be a cold or the flu that kills someone with a lower immune system. And so there's ways that things spiral. And we can see this in very practical ways as well. The first disease might show up in the balancing of our checkbook. And so if we lose integrity, the numbers stop adding up and a check bounces, then we get a bounce fee, which further lowers our account, which then gets another bounce fee. Now then, if we don't take care of that right away in some way, if we don't heal that disease, then we may not have the money to pay for a medicine. Then if we don't have the money to pay for the medicine and don't take the medicine, we may get sick. If we get sick, we may not go to work. If we don't go to work, we don't have more money, and when the rent due is, the amount goes down even more. When we don't have enough money, we get really stressed. When we get stressed, we get sick. When we get sick, we feel more stressed. And you can see how this can spiral and tighter into a very complex maze. And then how do we get out? So I used a physical example because it's easy to illustrate. But what can happen with mental emotional disease is it goes through these similar circular patterns, but because no one's talking about it, because in many cases we don't have the vocabulary, because in many cases we're too sick to do something about it, it spirals out of control. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the roadblocks that I've encountered in this theme of co-infections, creating double binds. So, so the first thing that, I want to kind of look at is the ripple effects of some of the things in my life. So when my parents hit and whipped and hurt me, and when our family dog would jump and knock me over when I was 2 years old and I could never escape, this created a sense of helplessness and terror and hurt that needed repair. It needed soothing and calming. When it didn't get soothed and calmed in a way that reassured and created security, I went on high alert. When the high alert didn't get calmed, I became hyper to, just rush around. I became manic to avoid being present to the pain and the helplessness and just waiting. When I became manic, I developed a learning disability. And so I was very slow to learn to read, for example. When I became manic, I also learned when I was manic that I was more palatable in some ways to my parents. Like I could run around, race around, make noises in a lighthearted hyper state. And it soothed my parents. So I also learned that they were more comfortable with that than my deep emotions. When there was no place to put my deep emotions and new things got added to it, I needed a place to talk. When I couldn't talk and couldn't cope with deep emotions and would get exhausted from being hyper, I started to develop migraine headaches. Now that's a corollary piece. I can't quite follow the thread into the migraine headaches, but I think that the essence of it is just this frozen sense of, what do I do? I'm being asked to be present to these things, and I can't be present with these feelings. I don't want to wait, and I need to be hyper, but I need to rest, and I need to calm down, but there's no safe space to calm down. So my sense is that the migraine headaches are somewhat just of an expression of this pressure. Now, when I developed migraine headaches and was hyper, the teacher at school said, my third grade teacher died. She was my closest bond, and she died in a car accident. Then I acted out a lot more in class because, again, there was no safe space to come down and grieve that death. The replacement teacher couldn't deal with the acting out and the hyperactivity, so he gave the school an ultimatum. He said, Dane leaves or I leave. So the school kicked me out. Well, this triggered shame for my father, shame and hurt. It's hard to say what it did with my father and my relationship. In some ways, it brought us closer together. But so then I left school. Then I'm left alone again. No peer contact. And because of that hyperactivity, parents were afraid of their children getting up to trouble with me. And so I was further alone than after school. So I'm now alone even more than ever with all this hyperactivity, with all this terror that there's no place to drop down into. There's no place to grieve my teacher's death. There's no space to talk about the terror. Then I try and talk about some of these things to adults, and then and I get shamed for that. And when I express this kind of acting out and abusing my younger siblings, tormenting them, egging them on, upsetting them in the same way that I had experienced, then I felt bad and ashamed and wouldn't advocate for myself. And then by this point, I'm just totally confused and I don't know what to do. If I'm hyper, people complain. If I come down, there's no place for the feelings. If I get headaches, there's some peace. I can just rest and nobody bothers me. So the headaches, in a sense, are a bit of a solution. And you can see the double bind here. And then I'm getting all this extra special education and tutoring, which ironically, in a few cases, was good because there were 2 of the tutors that would actually listen a bit and care about my feelings. So in a roundabout way, it worked. The symptoms and the solutions, the solution of the migraines and even being kicked out of school, worked in the sense of the tutors. So this is a little bit of what I saw as the ripple effect in childhood. As an adult now, I experience similar double binds. So part of me is in constant fear and panic in that hyper energy, only my body is not hyper and running around and expressing it. Instead, it's like this high frequency anxiety. And how it shows up is my muscles get tense, like my calves and my thighs, they get tense, and almost nothing can release them. Now, when nothing releases these muscles for a long time, numbness sets in, and I get numb legs. As numbness goes on for a long time untreated, I get chronic fatigue. And then the same pattern moves slowly up the body. So over a 20-year period, my body has been going slowly numb, slowly more and more tense, and slowly shutting down. And it's that same hyper energy, only now I'm in a place where, one, I've got control of it, so I'm not, I've got, in another series of kind of co-infections, when my father humiliated and provoked all of my feelings, I developed this stone wall and I developed this control. So I can control myself to perform very well at work, even when my body is numb, even when I've got chronic fatigue up to a point. But that point has been steadily going down, meaning my body is putting up with that less and less, and to a point where today I feel very sore, I feel exhausted, and I couldn't even do a solid hour of hard work without it triggering emotional stuff. And I'm a contractor. And so I've compensated for that by training my crew and getting better at delegating. And so I'm actually making more money because, I've compensated. But my own earning power and my own physical power is down at about 20% of what it would and should normally be. And so I'm operating at 20%. Now, it's so low at 20% that I get sick a lot easier. So I've had about 2.5 months of flu in the last year. When I have flu, when I'm sick, and when I realize how low reserves I've got because of all this nervous tension and chronic fatigue, there's more nervous because now there's something to be nervous about in the present. Before, it's just the past locked in, that for some reason, in the way the brain works with time and trauma, when we have a traumatic body memory, there's no sense of time. It's like it's in the present always, until it's released. And so we're looking at, science and stuff is studying how do we release that mechanism, but I do not know the answer to that at this point. So as my energy goes down, And my dependency on other people goes up. My fear of being out of control also goes up. My panic around that, my fear of making mistakes and looking bad and being punished also goes up, which is part, as a child, I developed this perfectionism, which was somewhat amplified by all the self-help and things like, Brian Tracy and all, I've read over 500 business books and things like that. And, there's all this drive of, perfectionism in the great companies. And I'm just exhausted right now. So I'm just going to relax. But with this, with this perfectionism energy, which makes the money, but exhausts me, and then I need to delegate more, and then I need to micromanage more to feel okay, particularly since my crew has about 50% of the natural quality standard that I do. It means I've got to micromanage. And every little thing I see wrong, I feel anxious about. And so that further kind of drags down the adrenals. Feeling powerless and like I've got very little room to work, like I've just got a couple of hours of work, I feel rage at the powerlessness, like I'm losing this battle. Despite everything I've done and I'm doing, I'm losing this battle. It's a losing battle. So I feel rage. In the rage and the terror that produces the rage, I feel critical. Like, come on, guys, I told you like that. No, I don't even have time to be polite. I'm exhausted. Do that, do this. And so, and then I feel shame about who I'm becoming. And I'm afraid then of being found out. Like I'm not as polite as I'd like to be. I'm not as kind and sensitive as I'd like to be. So I'm afraid of being found out. So now there's this, so co-infections of secrecy, co-infections of shame, co-infections of adrenal fatigue, co-infections of rage, co-infections of impatience, co-infections of pain. None of this is well-being. And it's all riding on this core, underlying, unresolved, deep-seated anxiety. It's vibrating at this kind of frequency. And it's very lonely then to be in this place. Like, I don't know what to do. I've got to micromanage more or I lose money. If I don't have money, I lose my serenity, my serene house. If I don't have my serene house, then I'm in a small little cramped space and my PTSD is being triggered all the time by noise, by everything that goes on that triggers that. So I need this beautiful space alone. But it's exhausting to try and keep up with the race. So this is the way that one infection becomes another, becomes another, becomes another. And then there's adrenal addiction and adrenal fatigue. And I need to come down sometime, but the question is, how and with whom can I come down? And the most beautiful answer is with a really loving, present, kind woman. So I need this really beautiful, present, kind woman to come down with and to. But the American woman is getting a shorter and shorter attention span, is getting more and more busy, is getting less and less tolerant of being directed. And yet I need to micromanage that or I'm not safe. And so, it just takes me into this whole other arena of co-infection and double binds with relationship. And the reason I'm talking about this is I want you to know you're not alone. I want you to know that you're sane, that even the weird things that you're doing and not doing to cope are, on an instinctive level, solving some problem. The trouble is they're creating another problem. So one part of me wants to curl up and sleep for a month and just rest with my chronic fatigue. That's the chronic fatigue problem. But the other part is so lonely and so terrified and so sad and so depressed and doesn't want to be alone in that feeling. Well, that part needs to get the hell, over to Philippines, where I can pick up my girlfriend and go to Thailand, which is what I'm going to do tomorrow night, to this wonderful resort. Part of me needs to go down, but part of me is constantly looking for a rev up to escape the just desperate dread and pain and fear and loneliness of those feelings. So in the co-infections of loneliness, dread, fear, and overwhelm, and exhaustion, and anxiety around money and need to make money, it's hard to get all these at one time. And so it's kind of this rotation. Like, okay, I'm going to work on the money piece, get the money piece done, then I'm going to collapse. Now I'm going to work on the fact that I'm so depressed that I'm just collapsed and laying here, and I've got to do something stimulating. The amount of stimulation that I need after doing everything on my bucket list, like I've done paragliding, hang gliding, bungee jumping, the whole, everything I could think of, I just poured it out in a year or so just to just get it done and also stimulate myself and give myself a rush. I've kind of done it. And so the amount in the hedonic adaptation principle, just like, you get to this point with cocaine where no matter how much you take, it just kind of makes you feel okay because you're overstimulated and you're numbed out. And so the brain is always reducing saying you need to do even more to feel the same level of pleasure and distraction. And it's no difference if it's cocaine or bungee jumping. The first time you bungee jump, it's amazing. You bungee jump 100 times the same day, you're desensitized. You bungee jump 100 times the same year, you're desensitized. You're no longer experiencing the rush. You're like, oh, as I'm bungee jumping, I wonder what I should have for dinner. Okay, there's the jump. Okay. Oh yeah, and then what about that? And oh, I guess I didn't even notice the bungee jump. It's that kind of numbing. And so the real question is how to get out. How to get out of this maze of co-infections and diseases on so many levels, when the underlying trauma memory, I don't know how to access that in my brain, and all the others kind of spin off from that in various ways. And when chronic fatigue in that environment, I don't know how to stop that. And I'm already doing all the stuff that I could be doing, and it feels like hell. How do you get out? So I don't know the answer to that, but what I do know is that when you have multiple diseases pulling you in different directions with different solutions, so there's overwhelming panic and emotion that's hard to come down and hard to cope with. Well, here's the thing, and this is where I feel very poor in America. 3 amazing buddies who can listen, who can carry me sometimes when I'm exhausted, who can hold me, who can understand the grief and let me cry. 3 buddies is probably all it takes to heal. But it's 3 kind of 24/7 nurse buddies, you know, that love and that care and that help me go through the thread and unwind. I don't know how to create those buddies. In the US, if I'm to hire nurses, well, first of all, men don't have, as a general rule, the level of tenderness. I had a Kaiser nurse who was a very sweet man and on the sensitive side, but, he would bang me quite hard when he hugged me just to make really sure that I was shaken as opposed to feeling tender. There's all this just miserable homophobia, or if it's a woman, all this crap around romance and sexuality. So it's really hard just to rest. It's really hard just to rest. It's really hard to come down because loneliness is one of the deepest wounds at so many levels. And it's just too much to go into all alone. And so that's part of the crisis. So I'm going to stop now, but, I've covered a couple of the areas things come together. And I'll just leave you with a summary that almost everything we do is a fix for one problem, and when we have multiple problems, it often makes another problem worse. It's really difficult to get out of the whole spectrum of disease. And when I have really great moments, one of the things that happens is I get lost and disoriented, like, where's this great moment coming? I don't know this. This is unfamiliar. What's familiar is this deep-seated panic. And so when you don't bond closely with your parents or peers at a young age, one bonds to something. We are a bonding species. So I think I bonded to terror. I bonded to my father's rage and terror in order to feel stable and solid about something. So when I start to let that go, I go back into the panic I felt before I bonded with those things when I'm 1 to 2 years old and I'm needing something to bond, and I can't bond with either one of my parents because they're both emotionally unavailable and I'm completely isolated. And I experience that overwhelming vulnerability, and it's terrifying. So I clutch on to fear, and then that creates the chronic fatigue. So the deepest issue of all is that profound vulnerability and the lack of trust in a world where most people have not been trustworthy in this terrain, and where no one sees, listens, cares, understands enough to really go there with me. And that's the crisis, the collapse, the desperation, the despair, the exhaustion.